Good morning and thank you for the opportunity to present this study. My presentation today focuses on the role of English proficiency in bilingual logistic education. The study looks at how students experience logistic related learning when both English and Malay are used, and how their English proficiency influences their participation, comprehension and confidence. The main idea is that logistics education is not only about technical knowledge, it also requires the ability to communicate clearly, especially because logistics is connected to international business, negotiation, customer service, and cross-border coordination. In this presentation, I will highlight the challenges students face, the support systems they rely on, and the curriculum changes that they may help prepare them better for the logistic industry. I will begin by explaining why English matters in logistic education when they move into the study background, methodology, key findings, and practical recommendation for curriculum improvement. Industry demand and English as a supply chain asset. This slide introduces the central argument of the study. Modern logistics depend on a strong infrastructure, but successful global negotiation depends heavily on communication, particularly English. In logistics, goods may move through ports, warehouse, transport networks, and digital systems. However, people still need to negotiate, explain, coordinate, solve problems, and build trust with clients and partners. For Malaysian graduates entering this field, English is therefore not just an academic subject. It becomes a professional tool. It supports customers' relations, documentation, reporting, negotiation, and collaboration with international stakeholders. Even when technical skills are strong, limited English communication can restrict students' confidence and employability. The key point here is that communication skills should be treated as a critical supply chain asset. Just as companies invest in the infrastructure and technology, education providers also need to invest in language and communication training that reflects actual industry demand. From this global industry demand, we can now look at the specific educational context in which students are learning. The tension between two realities. On one side, the global logistics industry expects graduates who can communicate in English with clients, suppliers, and international partners. On the other side, many students learn technical content in a bilingual classroom where English and Malay are used together. This bilingual approach has clear benefits. It helps students understand complex concepts more easily because explanation in Bahasa Melayu can clarify difficult technical ideas. However, the challenge is that students may understand the context but still struggle when they need to explain it independently in English. In other words, bilingual instruction helps comprehension, but it does not automatically produce confident spoken English. Therefore, the issue is not whether bilingual teaching is good or bad. The real question is how we can use bilingual support effectively while still helping students develop the English skills needed for professional logistic communication. The main language bottlenecks experienced by students. Most students are able to manage general English, especially reading and listening. They can follow lectures, understand basic explanation, and complete written tasks. However, the difficulty becomes more serious when they encounter logistic specific terminology and when they are expected to speak in English. The first bottleneck is terminology. Logistics has its own technical vocabulary such as warehouse management, customs regulations, supply chain, operations, delivery documentation, and industry procedures. These terms are not always covered in general English classes. So students may understand English generally but still feel lost when the language becomes discipline specific. The second bottleneck is speaking anxiety. Students may know the answer but they hesitate to speak because they worry about grammar, pronunciation, or being judged by peers. The third bottleneck is the lack of authentic practice. If students mainly complete written assignments, they have fewer chances to practice real workplace communication. As a result, they may become silent communicators. They understand more than they can confidently express. To understand these challenges more systematically, the study used a qualitative research design. This research adopted a qualitative design because the aim was to understand students' lived experience rather than measure proficiency through scores alone. A qualitative approach is suitable here because language learning in technical education involves confidence, anxiety, support, classroom culture, and personal strategies. These experiences are best captured through student voices. The instrument used was semi-structured interviews. This allowed the researchers to ask consistent questions while still giving students space to explain their experiences in their own words. The interview lasted approximately 10 to 20 minutes and focused on areas such as bilingual learning, technical technology, speaking confidence, peer and lecturer support, and recommendation for improvement. The sample consists of logistics students from a public university. Their baseline English proficiency was represented through MUET bands ranging from band 3 to band 4. This means the participants were not complete beginners. They had some English foundation, but the study shows that even students with intermediate proficiency may still struggle with spoken and technical English in a specialized field like logistics. Now, let's look at the most important findings. Students tend to be stronger in passive skills than active skills. Passive skills include listening and reading. Many students reported they could understand lectures, notes, videos, and written materials reasonably well. But this suggests that comprehension is not the main problem for all students. However, active deployment refers to speaking and using English spontaneously in real situations. This is where students experience more difficulty. They may understand the meaning of a logistic concept, but when asked to explain in English, respond to a question or participate in a discussion, they become less confident. The gap matters because the workplace does not only require students to understand information. Logistic professionals must speak to clients, clarify instruction, negotiate solutions, respond to problems, and communicate under time pressure. Therefore, curriculum design should not assume that good listening and reading automatically lead to good speaking. Students need repeated, low-pressure opportunities to practice active communication. This is where bilingual support becomes both helpful and potentially limiting. On the positive side, students clearly valued bilingual instruction. When lecturers or peers explain difficult concepts in Bahasa Melayu, students could understand the concept and content more quickly and avoid falling behind. This creates a supportive learning environment, especially for technical subjects where concepts can be complex. However, the same support may also become a limitation if students rely too heavily on Bahasa Melayu explanation and do not get enough practice using the English terms themselves. For example, students may understand a logistic process after it is explained in Bahasa Melayu, but they may still struggle to describe that process in English during a presentation, interview or workplace. Therefore, bilingual instruction should not be removed. Instead, it should be used strategically. Bahasa Melayu can support initial understanding, but students should then be guided back to English through repetition, examples, glossaries, role play, and oral practice. The goal is not English instruction, but a gradual bridge from bilingual comprehension to confident English communication. So, how do the students use to cope with language difficulties? The first is code switching. Students move between English and Bahasa Melayu to clarify meaning. This helps students understand technical content, especially when new terminology is introduced quickly. Second, the coping mechanism is peer support. Students often ask friends to explain unfamiliar words or concepts. This peer-based learning is important because students may feel more comfortable asking classmates than interrupting the lecturer. Strong students sometimes translate or simplify difficult terms for others. The third mechanism is use of digital tools such as translation apps, online dictionaries, and search engines. These tools help students understand unfamiliar vocabulary. However, this slide also reminds us that these strategies are mostly localized classroom survival tactics. They help students cope in the short term, but they may be not enough to prepare students for independent professional communication in global logistic settings. Okay, in another word, students are resourceful, but the curriculum should not depend only on informal coping. It should provide structured and sustainable support. Okay, a strong demand signal emerged around speaking practice. Students wanted more opportunities to speak English in realistic and supportive setting rather than only completing writing-based assignments. They suggested smaller discussion groups because small groups reduce anxiety and create safer spaces for students to try speaking. They also suggested debates and formal speaking competition which can build confidence and improve their fluency. Another important suggestion was to invite industry guest lectures. Students felt that hearing from logistic professionals would expose them to real workplace language and show them how English is actually used in the industry. The overall message is that students are not rejecting English. In fact, they recognize its importance. What they need is a learning environment that gives them enough guided practice to move from fear to confidence. For curriculum partners, these student suggestions are valuable because they point directly to practical, implementable changes. This slide proposes how the curriculum can be aligned more closely with student needs and industry expectation. The traditional approach often treats English as a general language learning, with emphasis on essay, grammar, and passive listening. While these are useful, they are not sufficient for logistic students who need discipline-specific communication skills. In the aligned curriculum, vocabulary instruction should focus more directly on technical logistic jargons. Students should learn terms through examples, diagrams, workplace scenarios, and bilingual glossaries. Speaking instruction should move beyond the theoretical lectures and include authentic communication styles such as role play, client conversation, delivery, problem solving, and warehouse communication simulation. The learning environment should also change. Large lecture halls may make students passive, while smaller discussion group can encourage participation. Assessment should also include oral proficiency and practical simulation tasks, not only written examination or assignments. In short, curriculum reform should prioritize oral communication, technical vocabulary mastery, and authentic logistic-based learning experience. So, this slide presents practical learning as a central requirement, not an optional extra. Students express a strong preference for learning that connects classroom knowledge with real workplace situations. Practical learning includes hands-on classroom activities, industry visit, mobility programs, internship, and reflection after exposure. The model here shows a cycle. Students first learn and practice in the classroom, then they are exposed to industry setting, then they reflect on their experience, and then they return to the classroom with a clearer understanding of what they still need to improve. This creates continuous contextual feedback. For example, after visiting a warehouse or logistic company, students may realize that certain English terms are used repeatedly in documents, communication, and customer handling. This makes vocabulary learning more meaningful. Similarly, when students practice role plays before or after industry exposure, they can connect language learning with real tasks. This is important because confidence does not develop from theory alone. Confidence develops when students repeatedly practice meaningful communication in contexts that resemble the workplace. This slide uses the bridge metaphor to summarize the desired transformation. On one side, we have the bilingual classroom, which provides the foundation for technical support mastery, concept mastery. On the other side, we have industry readiness and global employability. The problem is that students cannot cross from one side to the other through content knowledge alone. They need a bridge made up of the targeted language practice and authentic communication experience. The bridge includes three important elements: authentic logistic tasks, technical vocabulary development, and speaking confidence. These elements help students move simply understanding concepts to being able to explain, negotiate, and apply them in professional settings. The main message is that bilingual instruction pours the foundation, but targeted and authentic oral practice is the only bridge to global employability. This means we should retain the strength of bilingual teaching while deliberately building students' English communication capacity for logistic work. Finally, I will conclude with the next steps for logistic education. Okay, we can see in this slide, okay, there are three practical steps. First, institutions can implement authentic tasks immediately. This does not always require major funding. For example, existing English courses can include logistic role play, mock client calls, shipment problem-solving discussions, oral briefing, and short technical presentations. These tasks can be embedded into current courses without completely redesigning this program. Second, institutions should expand industry partnership, industry visit, internship, guest lecture, and mobility programs to expose students to the real communication in logistic settings. This partnership helps students understand not only what language is needed, but also why it matters. Third, future research should investigate the long-term impact of technical vocabulary training and speaking-focused interventions. The present study is qualitative and based on a small sample, so future studies can include more institutions, larger samples, and longitudinal designs. To conclude the study, here we can see that bilingual instruction strengthens learning and comprehension. However, spoken English proficiency and technical terminology remain key challenges Addressing these areas can help logistics graduates become more confident, industry ready, and globally competitive. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much, and I welcome questions. This ends the presentation and open the audience for questions. Thank you very much for the opportunity given.